Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt from a wet and cold Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Friday edition of the program. We're lucky to have Ben Domenech back with us. He is the host of the Big Ben podcast on the Fox Podcast Network, also a Fox News contributor, editor-at-large at The Spectator, and friend of the program. Ben, welcome. Before we get dragged into the drug boats, and I want to spend a lot of time on the drug boats, I want to thank you for covering First Choice New Jersey. Not many people cover life issues. And when you said, or she said, it's government intimidation dressed up as law enforcement, I said, amen, and I hope they bring a 1983 action against New Jersey. I could not believe the facts of the case. I'm not surprised they're going to win, but I could not believe that there were no complaints. And nevertheless, explain to people. Take it away.
Nothing for. Well, so just to explain this, in a thumbnail sketch, the simple fact of the matter is that you have a long time, established pro-life entity that is providing pregnancy advisory services, and health referrals, additional care and support for pregnant mothers, as exist all across the country, and they do wonderful work. I do fundraisers for them, essentially gratis, and if you have one in your community, I will always come to support the work that they do, because it's essential, it's important, and it's not something that is often very well publicized. That's one of the fights that they've had in recent years. But in this case, you had the government of New Jersey, the attorney general in that case, in the wake of the Dobbs leak, basically just looking for a target, it seems like, and going after this entity and demanding of them that they provide every kind of communication that they've had with any of their donors, lists of their donors, their current addresses, jobs, employers, et cetera, all sorts of information in a way that was clearly, meant to be the burden itself is the punishment. And that was a situation where they essentially said, we have to fight back against this, in part because, if we don't fight back against it, it could be a situation where we see this kind of thing repeated across the country. Thankfully, this ends up, after a certain amount of time in front of the Supreme Court, and it seems very clear. I mean, I listened to the oral argument. I don't know if you've had a chance to do so yet. That the justices.
I don't need to. It's so blatantly unconstitutional. It's just the war on pro-life centers, and I've been speaking at them for decades as well. California tried to make them carry state-demanded speech. That was struck down. I don't know what it's going to take. They're dummies. The lawyers are dummies, so I think it's going to take a financial judgment against the state pursuant to Section 1983.
I certainly hope so, Hugh. I mean, it's just so egregious, and it's just very clear. This is just, they are targeting these entities and trying to burden them in ways that they are not doing with any other entity, and they're doing it without any kind of complaint to hang your hat on, which is just absurd.
And I hadn't heard about it, by the way. I assume Alliance Defending Freedom or Thomas More were their lawyers, and I always talk about those guys, and they do great work. Kristen Wagner is on the show whenever, but I missed this case entirely. But I'm glad you spent half your podcast on it. That's probably more national media time than that case has received on any network or in any newspaper, because the facts are so bad for the abortion absolutists in this country. And the abortion absolutists run the map. Yeah. All right, now let's go to the drug boats. First question, I don't like to talk about my former employer much, but the Washington Post started this story. So I just want to step back and ask you, do you think Jeff Bezos is happy with his newspaper?
Well, a couple of people. Britt Hume was the one who said the line this week. This started out as a Washington Post exclusive, and it remained an exclusive.
Oh, great line!
which is a great line, and I think that the point is that this, as soon as this came up, and I think people have become more astute readers of old legacy media publications in recent years, in part due to the coverage of Russiagate and everything else related to that, but just a well-informed skepticism. When you have something that's just so perfect and seems perfectly to encapsulate the arguments of the Democratic Party at a particular moment that comes out like this, even if there's some truth to it, you have to have this degree of skepticism about, is this really the whole story we're getting? I don't think Jeff Bezos has to feel any confidence for the people involved in this story, especially when you saw the other major, again, legacy entities, including the New York Times, including ABC News, and including others, who came forward and basically said, yeah, this is not the full story. And they started running things that, were multi-bylined pieces that kind of ramp down, look, this is not the kind of dramatic, Tom Clancy-esque situation that the Washington Post described. And look, I think that's improvement. I view that as being, an improvement on the part of their behavior to sort of have that skepticism as opposed to just rushing to assume that everything the Post was saying was true.
I do. I'm glad that the story's been discredited. I'm glad we have the facts now and people can debate it. I just talked with Charles C.W. Cook about the constitutionality of the strikes, which I think is perfect. I don't think there's a problem with it unless and until Congress forbids it, which Congress might do under a Bolin-like amendment, but they haven't done it thus far. Now I want to talk to you about,
and so as long as they haven't done it, from my perspective, this is kosher. So
that's it.
But anyway, go ahead.
That's my standard. So now I want to talk about the fraud story from two angles. Minnesota is now up to $8 billion in fraud. California, by the way, makes them look like pikers. They had a $20 billion fraud in the unemployment scam run out of the prisons in California during COVID. But let's talk about the Minnesota story. Do you know Scott Johnson published that on Powerline blog in 2022? So years before Tim Walz was nominated to be vice president, the story was known to anyone who even sampled. Powerline blog is as good as it gets for online media that doesn't own it.
I mean,
they're OG. They took out Rather. So how come no other? Where was Legacy Media? Why are they surprised? This is not new.
Well, to a certain degree, Hugh, I think that this is kind of an indictment of the fact that you and I work in an industry that is so nationally focused, because there needed to be obviously a deeper dive into what was going on in Minnesota, and we've seen the clearing out and at the state level of so many different journalistic entities that might have otherwise been incentivized to look into this. But I also think that there was a hesitation factor simply because of the racial elements involved. And that was, came out explicitly in the emails that have been part of this whole thing, which showed that you had communications basically back and forth within the social services saying we can't deny this type of funding to these Somali-heavy interests because we will be accused of racism in the press, and they are more than happy to run in that direction. And so because of that, we just need to rubber stamp everything. To me, that is just, first off, that's an indictment of everything that the left believes. But it's also something that is, I think, increasingly weaponized within our bureaucratic system that has so much money flowing through it and has people who basically seize onto it as examples of, I'm going to create myself a sympathetic character. Derek Thompson over at formerly at the Atlantic, now just runs a Substack, had a point this week about the degree to which many major institutions of higher education now include bizarre high levels of people who claim to be disabled. You're looking at like percentages that are in the 25% level, for instance, of Stanford saying that they are disabled. And it's because they get certain advantages within those university systems. These people are not physically disabled. They don't actually have, disabilities as we traditionally understand them, but they understand that they get extra time to complete courses. They get all sorts of different advantages in terms of housing and in terms of their treatment on campus. The same kind of thing is happening, I think, all across the country when it comes to these bureaucratic elements, especially ones that are as generous as Minnesota, that has their own, Scandinavian type system that just is trying to dole out money, and people are taking advantage of that, and they're doing it to a criminal degree.
Now, the description you used, this is what happens when a low-trust culture interacts with a high-trust government bureaucracy, is a very elegant way of saying refugees or immigrants from countries where the rule of law does not exist and survival is not guaranteed act in ways to maximize their assets because there is no rule of law that they have to respect. They have to stay alive. So if you drop them into a culture like ours with a high trust bureaucracy like Minnesota, they're going to continue to follow those rules, right? And it's we should not be surprised. It is not racist. It is not anti-immigrant. It is simply predictable that if you bring people from a fragile place, they're going to grab whatever asset they can to stay alive.
Exactly, and it's not, and frankly, it's just the height of fantasy to pretend that they're not going to do that. You have to expect that to happen, and it's not a racist thing to expect that to happen. The other thing, though, that I think is a real key here is how much this looks like a situation where the Democratic side didn't even have to sweep this under the rug. This was not something, to get back to your original point about power lines, that they had to, hide the ball on at all, because nobody was really paying attention to it. And obviously when Tim Walz was named, a lot of us, myself included, were very skeptical of him and talked about his record in Minnesota and the negative aspects of it. But the degree to which this is now just a blight on his entire approach to governance and
done.
the approach of his party in Minnesota, I mean,
he's done.
Emblematic.
He should not run for governor. I'll be right back with Ben during the break. He'll be out on the other side because we're going to talk about the constitutionality again. We got lots to talk about. It's a great episode, except Ben did not talk about Ryan Day, so I'm going to with him during the break. Stay tuned. So I'm here with Ben Domenech, and Ben, you've done Friday nights on Special Report. If they have time, we do winners and losers. So I've already sent my winner and loser for the week. The winner of the week is Ryan Day because he crushed Michigan. And again, when everyone expected him to go off on the cheating and on Harbaugh, he just said, win with humility. So he won stature points. Then he signed Chris Henry today, but we lost. The loser of the week is anyone who has to play the University of Southern Florida for the next 5 years, because Brian Hartline knows what he's doing. You're a sports guy. What did you make of the week in Ohio sports?
Well, the week in Ohio sports, I mean, come on. The Ryan Day just silencing, I think, anybody who had any holdout skepticism about his situation. And, of course, Michigan just making fools of themselves, quite frankly, when it came to their behavior.
Protecting the I went to the law school there, right? I know how the big house is. I've run across that M in the Michigan 10-miler, but it made them look so stupid.
It just was ridiculous. And, look, I think – one thing that I do think, though, is a little unfair. There's so many things that are unfair about this current system, and obviously we know it's going through an evolutionary period, and we're going to end up with a different number at the end, which is probably going to be 16 in terms of the teams that are getting in. But the idea that, Ohio State now has to play an Indiana team, and there's a lot of other teams that are going to be automatically in that are just sitting on their butts this coming, on championship weekend. I just find that to be, problematic, not just because of, it's not really about the outcome. It's more about, are you going to lose players? Are you going to have injuries? Are you going to be, less well-rested compared to the people who you end up having to compete against? And that's something that I think that John Gruden has weighed in on this with some other alternatives. There's other people who propose things. I just think that this is something that is not sustainable in terms of the way that college sports approaches this. And I don't like the situation where we're, just trying to compare these things to each other with a group that is meeting in boardrooms and basically
black box operation. What did you make of the Chris Henry sweepstakes? Now, Ohio State won. Chris Henry is going to Ohio State. I don't know what it cost. Nobody knows what it cost.
I have no idea what you were paying for that. that is going to be a hefty amount. And look, I was in the green room. This is not Ohio State directly related, but I was in the green room with our friend Jason Chaffetz the other night, and I said, what is it that Mormons have against Penn State? because they absolutely ruined their coaching search, and of all things, it's just a funny situation in college sports.
I was with Ambassador Robert O'Brien for lunch today. And, of course, there are people around to take care of him, and one of the guys is a Penn State alum, and we spent half the time talking about what BYU did to Penn State.
But here's the one thing I would say. I actually think it would have been in BYU's interest to have that happen, in part because it cements you as being a place where coaches don't just go to coach there forever. They go there in order to grow their career, et cetera, et cetera. And I also think that that's, just a mindset, though, that doesn't have anything in common with the guy who owns Crumble Cookies, apparently.
But I'll tell you one thing. Penn State's the winner because Matt Campbell's a good coach. We're coming back on the network. Stand by. Welcome back, America. I've got Ben Domenech with me. Time for two more subjects. One, I hate Christmas parties. I don't go to them. I don't like them. I can't hear anything. Now, but some people love them. I have a feeling Ben Domenech is a lover of Christmas parties. Am I right?
Okay, so you would be wrong.
You're with me.
I have the same objection to them. I can't talk to anybody. But I will say this. I do end up having to go to a couple of them every year, including one yesterday, including one tonight. And I always end up finding that I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And then I go and I'm like, I was good that I did that. I saw people I hadn't seen in a long time, that kind of thing. And look, the Fox Media Party was last night, and it was great to see the folks who were there and applauding, Jackie Heinrich and Peter Doocy and Bill Malugin, who's coming to cover Congress, and Aisha Hosni, who's gotten. There's a youth movement going on in the D.C. Fox Center that I really
it's very good. It's very good. Yeah, it's very good. The youth movement in media generally has to take over, and it's good that it's happening. But they could do it in a bigger room with less noise. I just cannot stand the noise. All right, now let's get to the important thing: the constitutionality of the president's strikes on the drug boats. The Schlichter proposal is this. Kurt Schlichter came up with this. If those boats had canisters of mustard gas, would anyone say boo about it? What's your answer to that?
I don't think they would. Absolutely not. I also think that I am shocked. I don't know. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be at this point. But the fact that there are Democrats willing to go on TV and say the line that Adam Smith said from Washington State, that these narco-terrorists transporting all these drugs do not represent a threat to Americans is absurd. Why are they wrapping themselves in this? I mean, you can have the legal argument about the constitutionality of this. You can have the principled argument about, hey, we might get sucked into a war here that we don't want to be involved in. Those are all things that I'm willing to listen to from a lot of principled people who hold those positions. What I'm not willing to listen to after so many years, after decades of this kind of treatment by these narco-terror organizations who have killed Americans at an incredible degree, is the idea that they do not represent a threat to us, which is just absurd.
Well, there are 25,000, and then the argument that lasted for a half minute was, Venezuela only makes cocaine. Then you look, let's look, 25,000 people died of cocaine last year in the United States. So, yeah, it's not fentanyl, it's cocaine, doesn't matter. Or it might be heroin as well. Shoot down the boats. I think we're all with this. The only thing I worry about is, what if they start putting hostages on the boats, Ben?
You know what? I think that if they're smart, they're going to start doing things like that. They're going to start creating situations that are designed to make the American approach look bad. They haven't done it to this point. But I think that one of the things that is, a real, issue here, and we've discussed it before in the context of the tensions with Mexico, is actually the lack of human intelligence that we have about a lot of this. We have complete oversight. We have, drones that are all over the place that, completely can overwhelm any kind of forces that the Venezuelans put out or the Mexicans put out. But we do not have the kind of ground level human intelligence that we need about some of these organizations. And it's very possible that they could create a situation where, hey, let's roll something out that doesn't actually have any drugs on it, that doesn't have anything on it, and then try to make the Americans look bad. That is something that I think should be considered as things go forward.
Got to be very careful. They put kids on a boat, it's going to be a disaster. It'll be like the 100%. Chinese embassy that Clinton blew up during the bombing of Yugoslavia. Let me turn quickly. I can't remember. You are friends with Pete Hegseth, so I don't want to put you in a bad position. No, but I think there's a campaign to get Pete. I don't know him except as a guest on the radio show. I just think there's like a meeting somewhere that we're going to get Pete Hegseth, and we're going to get him out of there.
I think that you're completely correct about that. I think that they looked at this cabinet and they said, who is the guy that we can try to take out? And they, Pete's a big personality. He's a guy who, has always been front and center with the kind of way that he is and everything like that. I like Pete. I've gotten along with him. I know him, as a colleague from the Fox days, and I've, done various documentaries with him over the years. I respect him, and I think that he's a good guy. I also think that, he's completely capable of making mistakes. But it's one of the situations. I think this is one of these situations where there was a meet and greet among the resistance anti-Trump folks at some point, either in person, virtually, or just by psychic connection as a hive mind, that that Pete is the guy that they want to try to take out. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're willing to believe and advocate for the worst of him. And in doing so, I think they've actually trapped themselves now on a couple of different things where it's blown up in their faces, certain reporting that they've done. But at the same time, look, I don't think he's made things easier for himself sometimes, because I think he leans into the social media side of things in a way that, frankly, if you are not a member of the cabinet, is totally fine. But I think if you are a member of the cabinet, is a little more suspect and dangerous, because you can say things that have to get pulled back or corrected. Kash Patel has certainly experienced that himself. He's on that list too, I think, in terms of.
Well, yeah, it's like, remember Journo List? We need to tell people there used to be actually a listserv of journalists.
Yes, no, I mean, talking about, man, Powerline blog and Journo List, that takes us back.
Yeah.
Dave Weigel, by the way, still reporting for some.
Still a real reporter.
Journalist was one of the classics of the genre, because it was all these different lefty bloggers and members of the so-called mainstream media who were just chatting with each other and talking back and forth and sharing ideas in the way that you might, within, a sort of team seminar or something like that, as if they were all working together, because they were. And that's the kind of thing that I think we continue to experience today, whether it's on a listserv or not. Maybe they have a Discord thread.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. Rachel Maddow shows up on Stephen Colbert and goes completely left-wing nuts, and it's incoherent. I'm not here to talk about the substance. It's wrong. Everything she said is wrong. Every premise she put forward is wrong. Do you think Colbert booked her to screw NBC because they're canceling him? Or do you think part of the separation agreement between MS Now and MSNBC and all that required her to get some primetime or some late-night love in order to launch the network? Because it made no sense. It drove people away.
I think it's the latter. I kind of read it as being a situation where you've got to promote this new entity that is now separate, because that certainly seemed like something that was nonsensical otherwise. But, one of the things that I think you really get out of her appearance, and I do encourage people to pay attention to some of this, is just how much the beliefs that were ingrained in the left basically almost a decade ago now. I mean, we're in 2025. We're about to be 2026. Since 2016, the left has believed certain things about Donald Trump, despite all evidence to the contrary.
Rachel genuinely believes he's working for Putin.
She does.
I believe her.
She does. It's not an act. She's not just saying that to say it. I think she truly does believe that. And at this point, that is an insane belief.
It is.
Regardless of what your political affiliation is, that is an insane thing to think, based on his behavior, based on the policies that we've had, and based on everything that we've seen. So, but the fact that religious-like level of belief is allowed to persist, not just at low levels, but at the heights of the biggest podcasters and broadcasters and hosts on the left, is really an indictment of their entire system that allows them to live in this bubble.
Yeah, the American immune system to stupidity and craziness is really at all-time low levels. Ben Domenech, thank you. Go listen to the Big Ben podcast. It is a fabulous episode this week. You got to hear what they talk about with First Choice New Jersey. You got to listen to Ben on the video that raised our antenna, that we didn't even get to, the Seditious Six, etc. But it's all over at the Big Ben podcast. Follow him on X at B Domenech. Follow me to the next segment, America, of the Hugh Hewitt Show.